Hi everybody. In this video we're going to combine two things we already know. So we know how to create React apps, or at least kind of rudimentary React apps. We've probably watched that amazing set of videos by Tyler McGinnis, or we read a book about it, or we went through some web tutorials. However we learned how to use React, we should be somewhat comfortable with creating some, or have some basic skills at creating these React apps. And the second thing we need is some skills at creating the backend web server for these apps. And we've created those. We've created web servers that interact with the Postgres database and provide information. So people can do a GET request to our server to get some information, and it'll get it back. What we haven't done is kind of combine this technology. So we've done model view controller architecture. We have the view part covered in our React app. It's all the interactions with the user and what that looks like and what's displayed. And we have the model part. That's in our server file, the backend server. That's the stuff that's interacting with all the data and how data is stored and the format of the data and stuff. And the controller is that interactivity bit. And we have that's also in the server, backend server side. So we have all the model view controller. We just didn't glue it all together in the MVC combined job. And that's what we're going to do in this video. So we're going to glue stuff together. And that's where things get pretty cool and exciting. So you're not going to demo, even though you might think, hey, that's pretty neat that I'm writing these backend servers and can execute them in Postman. That's kind of neat, but you're not going to demo that to your relatives and say, hey, look, isn't this cool what I do? Because they wouldn't really get it. The React stuff is pretty cool. You could probably demo that and people might enjoy it. But what's really cool is developing your own web application that does everything, right? That has this front end to a back end that you develop. So that glue is really the cool bit. So that's what we're going to work on in this video. And it's not as hard as you think it would be. I shall also mention that when you're creating these apps out in the world, it's common that you have a team of people working. You're going to have some people working on the back end of web servers, the front end guys, and maybe some people mergey in the middle-y people. And so it's a whole team. In this video, I'm just going to kind of what one guy's doing this, one person. But keep in mind that it's kind of the same process or the same glomming glue that we're using regardless of the size of the development team. All right, so let's get started here, and let's say we already have kind of a server half built that it does some stuff, and it's this server here that I'm showing, and there's nothing exciting about this server. It's about, if I got rid of all these blank spaces, it'd be about 40 lines of code. That's really it. And I'm obscuring some of the code because I'm going to ask you to write a version of this shortly. So you don't see it, but I can tell you that it's pretty much what it's even an easier version of stuff you've already written. And what this little server does is it interacts with this food SQL file. So this food nutrition SQL file has information about various foods. So description is the name of a food, and it'll tell you how many calories are in the food, what's the protein of a food, how many carbohydrates are in the food, how much zinc's in that food or copper, where's the fat on the bottom here, different types of fat, 3 different types of fat are in the food. So it's going to give information about food. So my backend server will take a request, like someone will type in, ask what's the nutritional content of salmon, and our code will return that information. That's what server.js is. And you can imagine it's fairly easy to do, or maybe easy. I hate using that word easy, but it's within our understanding and our skill set if we've gone through those server tutorials on how to do it. So let me execute this. So that file is where I am here, and you can see, no it isn't. Up. Let me clear out of this. Sorry folks. I thought I was in the right spot. There we go. Now I'm in the right spot. All right, so I have this server.js file. Sorry for that kind of bollocksing up. That's this here, and I'm going to execute it. And we can tell even before I execute it that it's code that's going to be running on port 3001, and my program is going to look for GET requests on API food and as this console log at the way bottom suggests, there'll be some variable called Q, and that's the value kind of what the person's going to type in. So I'll show you that in a second, but we know that it's port 3001, and it's going to look for requests on API food. So let me run that, and I'll just say node, whoops. All right, so that's not a surprise. 3001, as he said, that's what's specified here, so that's good. And I'm going to be typing here in the terminal just because it's legible. It's really not the place to be typing this, but it's more legible than other places to type, so I'm going to go for it. And so if I want to make a request to that server, it'll be HTTP localhost 3001. And now what? Well, it's going to match this down here, API food. And now the question mark Q, because that's the name of the variable. And the variable, let's say I'm interested in salmon. So that's my entry. Again, this isn't the place to type it. It just happens to be legible. Because I'm going to take that, what I typed, and put it in the right spot, which happens to be not very legible because the font's very small. But I'm putting it there. And I get in, my server sends information back. So it finds, if I search for salmon, it finds fish oil, salmon. So it has 900 calories, has 0 carbs, 0 protein, and so on. The next entry is fish, salmon, tip nook, fermented. Sounds wonderful. And that has 159 calories, and it has almost 16 grams of protein, and so on. Here's fish, salmon, king, chinook, kippered. And I limit my search to 25, and these are the 25. So that's the server side. So I'm hoping that's sort of understandable. It's nothing new. It's what we've already done in other videos. All right, let's go on here. Let me close this. And let me stop. All right, so now what I want to do, let's say, is create the client side of this application. Again, maybe you've been developing the client side, the React side first, but in this demo, I'm kind of doing it this way, that I got at least a rudimentary server running, and now I want to have create a little bit of the view, the React component. And to do that, I'm going to switch tabs just so I have 2 tabs up and running. And I'm going to install something that perhaps you may or may not have installed. And it's just create React app. Maybe you did, but I already installed this, so I'm not going to do this again. I'm just doing it here just so you see the command, and I'll let you go ahead and install it if you haven't already, or watch ahead and decide if you really want to use this method. You can stick with the method you've already been using, but once you do that, you can type create React app and give it the name of an app you want. So it's your own, you can call it my app, you can call it foodie, you can call it whatever you want. For this demo, let me call it Zen. Oh, let's call it foodie. I like that actually. All right, so I'm going to create an app called foodie. And notice I'm in the food directory, and now what it's doing is it's going to, this create React app kind of creates a template for a React application. And what that means is this. So let's say you wanted to create this React application called foodie. You'd probably make a directory. You'd probably do npm init on it. You'd probably install some important stuff like React and React DOM. So notice that's what it's doing. It created a directory called foodie. It did that npm init. It's installing these packages. Next, what you'd probably do is, well, I don't know, maybe you'd start writing some basic JavaScript files. You'd create an index.js file, an app.js file, get a couple style sheets up and running, index.css, and so on. So you'd kind of create the same stuff pretty much for every React app before you get onto your creative stuff of, well, how is this React app going to really do stuff, right? It's like the common template that you're using. So that's what this does. It gives you that common template that helps you get started. You don't need to use it. You can use whatever method you've already been using, but this is sort of an easy way of doing it. All right, and while we're waiting for that to happen, and by the way, even though it looks long, as I told you what we would have to do manually, this is actually fairly short compared to doing everything our own. But here's this directory that we're in, it's the directory.js, the server.js file. It doesn't have to be here, but it's a nice place to do it. And you see that it created my foodie directory there, or folder. And let me just give a second for it to finish, and then let's take a look inside foodie. All right, and it looked like it stopped. So let's go in, or finished, let's say. And let's go in there. And so now I'm in foodie, and this is what that create React app created. And you see it looks pretty much like what we'd create for a React app. So we have a package.json file. We have some source code, and that has index.css, index.js looks good. We have an app.js. So everything looks kind of the way we would expect it if we were doing it by hand, manually. All right, so let me close that, and let me, let's do what it suggests. So it said, hey, let's change directory foodie, and let me start the app. And this takes a bit of time. We've done this before when we were working with React. So remember, it brings up automatically that browser window. And then it's not exactly compiling. I don't know what building, let's call it building. So it's building our app. Well, building is not exactly what it's doing either. It's working on creating our application here. Once it's done, it'll display it in the browser. And when we make changes, things are faster, but this initial step is somewhat time consuming. And there it is. So that's the template that it automatically created. And then it says to get started, edit source app.js and save to reload. Well, let's go ahead and do that. And let's open up an editing window here. And it was called foodie, the directory. So there's the foodie directory. I'm just going to open that. And here's that directory structure here on the left. Let me close this other window and move that there and move this here. There, I think we're good. Okay, and it says edit source. Well, let's look first. So the index.js is a pretty standard index looking file, right? And it just does the render of the app, and that's why it's saying edit app.js. The app.js is the interesting one currently. And here we have the logo and the image there. That's displayed here, this nice bluish thing, and welcome to React. Well, let's just say welcome to foodie. And then I'm not being creative here. For all information about food. All right, and now I'm just going to simply save the app. This we've probably seen before when you're working on React stuff. But as you know, you don't need to stop the server and start it again. It just, as soon as you save a file, it automatically regenerates and displays it. So you can kind of interactively be doing that work. So I have now a server, and it's running a React server, and it's running on port 3000. Let me go back to my terminal here. And let me go to this tab and start my server, which remember was running on port 3001. Okay, so it says I'm running on 3001. Let me go here. Let me paste and see if that's a good one. Yeah. So here's my localhost 3001 API food salmon. And there's all that information, and not as nice a form as Postman, but we're getting information on salmon. So now I have two servers running. One on 3001, which is sort of the back end server, and one on 3000, let me get that one going, 3000 here, which is the React server. And I can keep those both up and start, when I do an Axios, let's say I want to modify the React stuff and do a call to a backend, I can do that Axios call or whichever method you want to use to connect to 3001. So it's kind of whatever you learned in your React tutorial applies here. So, and let me demo that a bit. So let me stop or this here. So I've created foodie, but before the video started, I created one called client. So I did that create React app client, and let me just show you that code quickly. There's food, and that was foodie, but client is pretty much the same. I did create React app, and I gradually changed from this, wrong display here, it's stopping, sorry, this welcome to foodie. Little by little, I was altering it to at least get this interaction working, as you'll see shortly. So, in the directory structure. So that's client. So let me do that. So this is foodie still. So let me stop that and change to client. And this one is I modified. You'll see shortly that I gradually modified it. This takes a little bit of time usually. And there we have this program. So you can tell I didn't do much change, but I added this little search thing where I can search for foods. And when I do a GET request to find it, when I'm calling to find, I'm asking that server on port 3001. So here I'm on 3000, and I'm making requests to 3001. Let me show you that. Well, let me go salt. So it's finding information about salted here. So again, I have two servers running, one on 3000 here, and my backend server, there you can see I was typing out some debug information, and it's typing in that salted. All right, so that's cool. And that's how you would do, or one way you could do development, right? Bring up your server on one port and work on a React component that's on another port. All right, so salted works perfectly fine. So now I have everything working pretty well. And again, let me just show you here. Let me go to more tools, developer tools. When I'm developing stuff, I commonly have quite a lot of debugging information here, and you can see I'm getting some error, and the error I'm getting is no access control allow origin header is present on the requested resource. And let me just see if I can duplicate that error, and it seems to be there. I'm generating it again. Okay, so we get this error, no access control allow origin header is present on the requested resource. So that's an error that we need to handle. And what this means is there's a term called CORS, which is cross-origin resources. Now, an origin is a particular server. In our case, we have two servers, one on 3000, one on 3001. It could be a server on Zaharsky.org talking to a server on hypothetical.org. But in any case, it's two different servers. And unless we allow these servers to communicate, they won't communicate. We'll generate this error that it's a cross-origin request. So we need to allow this origin header, which is kind of saying that. I'm not saying it any better than this term. One way to fix it is we can just have an extension, and it's probably the wrong way to go in Chrome, but let me just show you that I can enable cross-origin research sharing. And now if I search for salted, it's not occurring. I don't get that error. Let me turn that off and see if I can get that error again. And I'm generating these errors. So that's a way to fix it while we're in development. And maybe it's okay, but it's really not necessary because there's an easy fix we can do in the code to handle it. And in this case, it's not going to be an error that's going to creep up in production, perhaps in the way we're using it, but at least in development, we're creating this error. So let me just show you how to fix that error. All right, so here we are in our initial server.js file. That's the running on port 3001. All right, and I'm going to go app use. All right. Okay, and this is the website we want to access or allow to connect to. Sorry. And here we would put which websites we're allowing GET requests from. So I could say HTTP localhost 3000. That's perfectly legal. Or I could say you can get requests from anybody. Please, that's the Cleany star. I allow anyone to use it. Okay, I saved it, I guess. All right, let me make sure I'm running on the same. All right, this is the server side. I'm stopping the server. Started it again. Okay, and I'm good. So there, I'm not, as you can see, I'm not getting that error. I'm just adding it. That error was happening when it wasn't finding a food, and I'm not getting that error anymore. So that seems to be fixed. So that's the way to fix the cross-origin resource error. All right. So now, though, we're running a server, our React stuff on one server running on 3000, and our backend server on 3001, and we can develop, getting what we want, how things to look on our development machine. So it's an easy way. It's not the only way. There might be others that are better for you, but it's an easy way that I use to get this working. So it enables us to start developing this app that's working together, the backend and the React stuff. Now it's going to be time, let's say, that we want to combine them. We want to have them run all on the same port in one application. And so now I'm going to explain how to do that. And here's the kind of step-by-step instructions. And I could have done a better job saying where to do this. So, but let me step through it. So we need to modify server.js, and this is, we could just say in there app use express static client build. I'll explain that in a minute. But I like to do it with an if statement, or one way to do it is with this if statement. You'll see how that's used in a second. All right, and I'll do that here. So I'm going to go if. And I just do this just so I know it got into that if statement. That's the only reason. This is the important line. I'll explain it in a second. Okay, let me explain it before. So here it says, so if I'm saying I get this environment variable node end is that equals production, I'm going to use some static files in a particular directory. Now let me open up that directory folder. All right. So here I'm at the server.js file that I'm editing, and I have a client folder. That's the one I created with create React app. And I, in there, have build, which is where the compiled or the built files will be. And so that's how I determine that if I name this something else, like create React app salmon, obviously I wouldn't have the word client here, but that's where that's coming from. Okay, and that's it for that file. All right, so again, this client build has to do with the directory structure. It's I use client build because that's where my client React component or the React component is. So, and here it's in relation to server.js. So, for example, if I was using Foodie, I didn't build it, but if I built it, it would be Foodie build. All right, that was that explanation. So that's the first thing we need to do. Let me save that. The next thing we need to do is modify package.json in the main directory where the server.js file is. So this we've sort of done before in another video. It's sort of the same thing, but let me go ahead and do that. Here's my package.json file, and I'll say start. That's what I'm going to call it. You can call it whatever you want. Start production. And I'm giving, again, that's just my name of an environment variable. You can name yours whatever you want. Okay, so when I do npm run start, it sets this environment variable production and then calls node server.js. Server.js says, whoops, if that environment variable equals production, which it does now because that's I just set it, it's going to use the static files. All right, cool. So that's that. So now I need to build those static files. Before I was just running it with it. Remember, there's a difference between running the app in development and then actually building the app. So now I need to actually build it. And this is within the client folder. So let me go ahead and do that. That's in this folder. Whoop. So this is sort of creating a static, well, static is kind of a rough word, but let's call it a static resource. Okay, and that's done. And finally, the last step, it's really not a step, it's just to run it. And running it, it's going to be in the server directory, not in the client directory. So I'm going to back out of this. Let me just make sure I stop my other server here. So let me just list the files there. So that's the client directory that I did the create React app client, but you could do it any way you want, I mentioned. There's my server.js file I modified, the package.json file I modified, and now I'm going to go npm run start. And that's good. It got in that if statement because it said running production server. And now everything should be running on port 3001. Remember last time the React stuff was on port 3000 and my server, backend server stuff was 3001. Now everything's on one port. That's pretty cool. All right, let's go there. So this is port 3. Let's go to port 3001 here. So localhost 3001. And there it is. So it's running now in production mode. And I still have a lot of debug stuff I should probably clean out, but it's very helpful for me when I'm developing this stuff. But that's it. That's how you get, first how you can kind of do development when you're trying to combine both the API stuff, the server-side stuff, and how to combine that with the React stuff you're building. So kind of the two threads you've been working on suddenly combine into one really cool thing. And how to do it in development, and then how to do it in production. Pretty easy. Just follow those steps that I mentioned. Let me scrounge up those steps again. And that's them. All right, now I'm going to have you do it. I'm going to stop this video and have another 2-minute video explaining what I want you to do. Bye.